On our anniversary, I left my wife to visit my mom, who said it was urgent. But she was just drinking wine and asked me to water her plants. That night, my wife asked for a divorce. A few days later, my mom sent me nudes. That's when my life fell apart. My name is Alex, I'm 36 years old, and for the past 6 years I've been sharing my life with Emily, my wife, my partner, and truly my best friend. We've been married for 4 of those years, and though I always knew I loved her deeply, everything changed the moment our daughter Sophie came into the world. She's only 1 now, still learning how to walk without tipping over and babbling in her sweet little language that only she understands, but somehow she already feels like the center of the entire universe. My universe, anyway. Sophie was born on a gray, rainy Tuesday morning, and I remember every second of it with more clarity than anything else in my life. Emily had been so calm throughout the labor, even cracking jokes with the nurse between contractions. I, on the other hand, was a mess, pacing, sweating, trying to be helpful and probably failing. But when Sophie finally let out that first sharp cry, I forgot every single thing except the sound of her voice. I never thought a cry could sound beautiful until then. Since that day, Emily has amazed me in ways I didn't think were possible. She's the kind of mother who somehow manages to make midnight feedings look graceful, who sings lullabies so softly and so sweetly that Sophie immediately relaxes in her arms, and who always knows exactly when to be patient and when to be firm. It's not just the way she cares for Sophie, though that alone would be enough to leave me in awe, it's the way she balances everything. The way she still reaches out to touch my shoulder when she passes by me in the kitchen, or the way she gently nudges me awake when I've fallen asleep on the couch with a bottle in my hand and Sophie curled up on my chest. Our lives aren't extravagant. We don't have a big house or flashy vacations. Most nights it's just us, dinner on the couch, Emily with her feet in my lap while we half watch some show and talk about the weird things Sophie did that day. And I swear, no matter how mundane it might sound to someone else, it's everything to me. Emily, she is everything to me. My mom, Linda, is a different story entirely. From as far back as I can remember, she's always been bossy, always needed things done her way, and always had this overwhelming need to control every little detail of my life, even as I got older and tried to carve out some independence for myself. It wasn't just the usual overprotectiveness some moms have. With her, it was invasive, relentless, like nothing I did could ever be trusted unless it had her stamp of approval. When Emily and I got engaged, I was hoping maybe she'd finally step back a little, just enough to let us have something of our own, but of course that didn't happen. The wedding became a battleground almost immediately, with Linda inserting herself into every decision. The venue, the guest list, even the menu. She had this way of making it all sound like she was just trying to help, but really, it was about control. Emily had her own vision, simple and elegant, but my mom steamrolled her ideas like they were child's play. I can still remember the look on Emily's face during one of the early planning meetings when my mom dismissed her suggestion for an outdoor ceremony because it wasn't classy enough. I should have stood up for her right then and there, should have told my mom to back off, but instead I convinced Emily to just let it go, to let my mom have this one thing. Actually, I convinced her to let my mom have all the things. To Emily's credit, she didn't explode. She didn't make a scene. She smiled through it, stayed composed, and went along with everything because I asked her to. And even after it was all said and done, after we said our vows in a church decorated the way my mom wanted and had a reception that looked more like a corporate gala than a celebration of us, Emily still held my hand at the end of the night and told me she loved me. She forgave me for letting my mom run the show, for not pushing back when I should have, for making her feel like a guest at her own wedding, but I know she didn't forget. She's never thrown it in my face, not once, but I can see it in the way she stiffens when my mom calls or how she sighs quietly whenever Linda drops by unannounced. It's there, lingering, this quiet reminder that I failed her in a moment that was supposed to be ours, and I know I owe her more than just an apology. I owe her better. For years, I didn't protect Emily from Linda the way I should have. I told myself things would get better, that my mom didn't mean any harm, that she just had a strong personality, but deep down I think I always knew that wasn't really true. The passive aggression was constant. Little jabs disguised as compliments, backhanded remarks about Emily's cooking, comments about how Sophie looked more like my side of the family, as if that somehow made her better. There were times Linda would drop by uninvited, walking through the door like she owned the place, rearranging things in our kitchen, folding laundry that wasn't hers, making subtle digs about how things should be done. And Emily, God bless her, would grit her teeth, smile tightly, and try to keep the peace, all while I stood there telling myself it wasn't that bad. Linda had a way of manipulating situations, always managing to twist things so that she seemed like the victim, like she was just trying to help, and Emily was the one being unreasonable. I let it happen. I let her steamroll my wife in our own home, and every time Emily brought it up, I either brushed it off or made excuses, saying Linda just didn't know how she came off, or that she meant well, or that confronting her would only make things worse. The truth is, I was afraid of standing up to my mom, not physically but emotionally, because she always found a way to turn any criticism into a guilt trip. But I didn't see the full extent of the damage I had allowed until our last anniversary. That night changed everything. It was supposed to be a small, intimate evening, nothing extravagant, just the two of us sharing a bottle of wine after Sophie went to sleep, cooking dinner together and enjoying a quiet night at home. We had agreed it was the best we could do given our budget and our new parenting reality. I thought Emily was okay with it, even though I could tell she wished we could have done more. She still smiled when I brought it up, still kissed me on the cheek and said, "It's perfect as long as we're together." But then my mom called. Claimed it was an emergency. And like a fool I went. We had decided to spend our anniversary at home this year, something quiet and simple, because the truth is, we just don't have much money right now. We're still figuring out the balance of being young parents and working hard to keep everything afloat. The bills, the diapers, the exhaustion. It adds up fast. But none of that mattered to us as much as just being together. That was the whole point. We weren't expecting candlelit restaurants or grand gestures, just a night that belonged to us. I told Emily I'd pick up a nice bottle of wine, her favorite, and cook dinner for the two of us once Sophie was down for the night. We'd put on some music, sit at the kitchen table like we used to, maybe slow dance in the living room if we weren't too tired. Everything was arranged. 6 o'clock sharp, we'd both be home, just the two of us. No distractions, no obligations, just a quiet celebration of surviving another year together in the middle of the chaos that is new parenthood. It wasn't going to be fancy, but it was ours. At least that's what it was supposed to be. At 5:30 in the evening, just as I was wrapping up work and getting ready to head home for the evening Emily and I had planned, my phone rang and it was my mom. Her voice was frantic, shaking, crying. She was shouting that something was wrong, that it was an emergency, that I needed to come over immediately. I asked her what kind of emergency, if I should call someone if she was hurt, but all she did was sob harder and beg me to come right away. In that moment, something in me panicked. Maybe it was instinct, maybe guilt, maybe years of being trained to respond to her chaos without question, but I gave in. I didn't even think it through. I texted Emily that I might be a little late, told myself it would just take a few minutes to check on my mom and then I'd be home in time for dinner. When I pulled up to her house, heart pounding, expecting some kind of disaster, what I saw instead was her sitting calmly on the couch with a glass of wine in one hand, the TV playing quietly in the background. No tears. No panic. No visible emergency. Just my mother, completely composed, sipping wine like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just derailed my entire evening with a performance worthy of an ambulance. I stood there stunned, my anger rising with every second, and when I asked her what the hell was going on, she waved her hand dismissively and said she just needed some help around the house. Help. On the night of my anniversary. Tasks like watering plants, wiping down countertops, moving furniture slightly to the left, things she was more than capable of doing herself. There was no emergency, not even close. Just another manipulation, another guilt trip, another way to remind me that she still had the power to pull me away from my own life whenever she felt like it. I ended up staying at my mom's house until 7:30 that evening, wasting what should have been a quiet, meaningful night with my wife by doing a list of small, completely non-urgent chores she could have easily handled on her own. It was ridiculous. Watering a few plants, moving a couple of boxes in the garage, wiping down kitchen counters she claimed were filthy, even though they were spotless, checking the batteries in the smoke detectors, all while she hovered over me with a wine glass in hand, making these dramatic sighs and dropping little comments about how I never come see her anymore. At one point, when I hesitated to keep going, she snapped at me and accused me of being a bad son, of abandoning her, of forgetting where I came from now that I had a new family. And I just stood there, stunned, exhausted, torn between frustration and guilt that had been ingrained in me since childhood. At some point in the middle of it, I pulled out my phone and sent Emily a quick text to let her know I was running late. I didn't go into detail. I didn't want to worry her, or maybe I didn't want to admit out loud that I had let my mom sabotage our night. I just said I'd be home soon and that I was sorry. But she didn't reply. Not even a K. The silence from her phone felt heavier than any words could have. I knew then that I had crossed a line I might not be able to come back from. When I finally walked through the front door, just past 8 o'clock, the house was dark and quiet and Emily was gone. At first, I told myself she must have taken Sophie for a drive or maybe gone to pick something up, but deep down, I think I already knew it wasn't something that simple. I looked around the living room where our dinner was supposed to happen. the table set with care, the wine bottle unopened, the food cold, and I felt this sickening weight settle in my chest. I checked my phone again, still nothing. Eventually, I used our family locator app, the one we usually only used for emergencies or when one of us forgot to answer our phone, and that's how I found out she was at her parents' house. She didn't come back until nearly 11 p.m., and when she did, she didn't walk in with anger or yelling. She walked in with quiet resolve, the kind of calm that feels more terrifying than rage. I stood there with a glass of champagne in my hand, thinking maybe I could salvage something, maybe we could still sit down and talk it through. But she looked at me, didn't even glance at the drink, and said softly, almost too softly, "Save it for yourself." Then she looked me in the eye and told me she wanted a divorce. Just like that. No shouting, no dramatics, just a sentence that shattered everything. I was in complete shock. I asked her what she was talking about, why she would say that, and she told me that tonight had been the final straw in a long, painful pattern. She said she was tired of being second to my mother, tired of feeling like she had to fight for a place in her own marriage, tired of the way I always made excuses for Linda and left Emily to absorb the consequences. She said that on the one day that should have been about us, about our love, I still chose my mother. She wasn't angry, not visibly, but her voice was full of a kind of sadness I had never heard from her before. And that's what broke me. Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't threatening to leave out of spite. She was doing it because she had nothing left to give. I stood there completely wrecked, begging her to reconsider, to not throw everything away over one night, even though deep down I knew it wasn't just about that night. It was about every time I had chosen silence instead of standing up for her, every time I let my mother cross lines that should have never been touched. I asked her to give us a chance, pleaded with her to try therapy, told her I would do anything she needed me to do, that I was ready to make real changes. But she refused. She said she had been trying for years, hoping I'd eventually draw a line, and that she was done hoping. That night, she moved into the guest room without another word. I heard the door shut gently behind her, not slammed in anger, just closed like she was sealing herself off from something that had hurt her too many times. I didn't sleep at all. I just sat in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the baby monitor and thinking about every time I had failed her when it mattered most. The next morning, I tried to catch her as she was leaving to drop Sophie off, desperate to find some kind of opening, some tiny sign that we weren't completely lost. I leaned in to kiss her goodbye like I always did, like muscle memory, like routine that hadn't caught up to reality yet, but she simply moved out of the way. She didn't say anything, didn't even look at me, just picked up her keys and walked out the door. In that moment, the silence between us felt louder than anything I had ever heard. That was when it finally hit me with full force. This wasn't a fight we could sleep off or fix with flowers or promises. The situation was critical, and I was already standing in the ruins of something I should have protected long ago. As if things weren't already hanging by a thread, the very next night, Linda showed up at our house unannounced, like she so often did, acting like nothing had happened, as if it was just another regular evening where she could barge in and take over. She didn't even knock, just walked in like she owned the place, carrying that same smug energy that had always rubbed Emily the wrong way. I was still trying to process everything, still holding on to some naive hope that Emily might cool down and reconsider, but the moment Linda walked through that door, I saw Emily's entire posture change. She didn't yell, but her expression said it all. She was done pretending. They got into it almost immediately. Linda asked how our anniversary was, all fake smiles and condescending sweetness, and Emily just looked at me completely exhausted and said, "Handle your mother." Those were her exact words. Linda took offense, of course, demanded to know what that meant, started raising her voice, accusing Emily of being disrespectful and ungrateful, and it escalated from there. By the time I made it downstairs to try to diffuse things, it was already too late. The damage was done. Emily walked away in the middle of it, just shook her head and went upstairs, and I finally told my mother to leave. When she refused, I told her that if she didn't walk out, I would call the police. That got her out the door, but the look she gave me on the way out was one I'll never forget. Shock, betrayal, like she couldn't believe I had chosen someone else over her. But I had. Too late maybe, but I had. After she left, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't peace, it was emptiness. The next morning, Emily packed her things in silence. She didn't ask for help. She didn't say much. She packed a bag for Sophie, grabbed a few essentials, and told me she was going to her parents' house. This time I didn't try to stop her. I just stood there watching my family walk out the door, knowing exactly why she was leaving, and hating myself for all the times I didn't act sooner. After Emily left with Sophie and the house felt like a ghost town, I tried to collect my thoughts, to breathe, to make sense of how everything had unraveled so quickly. I didn't know where else to go, and despite everything, I found myself packing a bag and temporarily moving in with my mother. I told myself it was just until I figured things out, that it would give Emily space and give me time to reflect on how I had let things spiral so far out of control. But staying there, even for a few days, forced me to see things I had spent most of my life ignoring. It didn't take long before I realized just how warped my mother's behavior really was. At first, it was little things: the guilt tripping over how I wasn't spending enough time with her, the passive-aggressive jabs about Emily not being strong enough to handle a real family, the comments that felt more like emotional traps than conversations. But then it went further. Her physical closeness started to feel off, lingering touches that made me freeze, sitting too close on the couch, brushing her fingers across my neck when there was no reason to. One night, she sat next to me while I was watching TV and ran her hand through my hair in a way that didn't feel motherly, not even remotely. When I flinched, she just smiled like I was being ridiculous and said she had always loved how thick my hair was, then leaned her head against my shoulder like we were some couple in a rom-com. I remember sitting there, absolutely frozen, trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood something, that there was no way my own mother could cross a line like that. But the more time I spent in that house, the more the pieces started to fall into place. All the years of manipulation, the way she inserted herself between me and every woman I ever cared about, the way she controlled me through guilt, shame, and twisted loyalty. And now this. I realized I hadn't just failed to protect Emily from her. I had spent my entire life being manipulated by someone who didn't seem to understand, or didn't care, about the boundaries that define a healthy, respectful relationship, not just between a mother and son, but between any two human beings. That was the moment everything truly broke inside me. She crossed a line I never imagined could be crossed between a mother and a son. It all started with strange messages that became increasingly disturbing, and then one day an email landed in my work inbox, containing something that made my entire body go cold. It wasn't just an inappropriate joke or a weird comment. It was something deeply wrong and unsettling, something that couldn't be justified by any excuse or emotional impulse. I couldn't believe it was happening, couldn't believe that the same woman who was supposed to raise and protect me could do something like this. But denial had no place anymore. I gathered everything, the emails, the screenshots, the messages, and handed it all to my lawyer. This wasn't just emotional manipulation or boundary pushing. It was a violation that required a firm and legal end. After that, I blocked every way she could reach me. Phone numbers, email addresses, social media, gone. I changed my passwords, wiped my devices, made sure she couldn't access even a sliver of my life again. It was final. It had to be. And as painful as it is to say, I can't see her as my mother anymore. Whatever she was before that moment, it no longer exists to me. In the days that followed, I sank into a kind of numbness I can't fully describe. I stopped sleeping. Food barely tasted like anything. I'd look at Sophie's toys scattered across the living room and feel this overwhelming wave of guilt, shame, and disbelief. How had I let it get this far? How had I let someone like that have any access to the world I built with Emily, to our daughter, our home, our peace? I reached out to Emily one night, not with the hope of fixing things, but just to tell her the truth. I owed her that much. I told her everything, not in graphic detail but enough for her to understand just how deep the dysfunction went. I told her about the messages, the photos, the lawyer. I told her I had cut my mother off completely and that I was getting help. For the first time in my life, I said the words out loud: "She manipulated me for years and I let her hurt you because I didn't know how to break away." There was a long pause after I sent the message. Then another. Then a whole night of silence. But the next morning, I woke up to a single text from Emily. It read, "Thank you for telling me. I'm glad Sophie won't grow up thinking that's normal." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. And for now, that's all I have. The wreckage of what I lost and the hope that maybe one day I can rebuild something better from it. I went to therapy because, honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I was spiraling, emotionally drained, ashamed, confused, and carrying the kind of weight that you can't just shake off by talking to a friend or going for a walk. I needed someone who could help me make sense of the chaos I had been living in for so long without even fully realizing it. From the very first session, I could feel the pressure in my chest start to loosen, just a little, as I spoke freely without fear of judgment for the first time in what felt like years. After I explained everything, from my childhood memories to the recent breakdown of my marriage and the disturbing behavior from my mother, my therapist sat in silence for a moment before gently naming what I hadn't been able to. She called it emotional incest. I remember recoiling slightly at the term, like it was too heavy to be real, too disturbing to apply to my life. But as she began to explain, it all made a sickening kind of sense. My mother had never established appropriate emotional boundaries, and instead of treating me as her child, she had placed me in the role of her confidant, her emotional partner, and in ways I never noticed until now, her surrogate husband. What made it even more horrifying was realizing that she literally saw me as a replacement for my late father. She had told me before, in passing, how much I reminded her of him, how I had his mannerisms, his voice, his presence, and I used to think it was just her way of remembering him. But in therapy, I started revisiting those conversations, the way she clung to me emotionally after his death, how she refused to date, how she seemed to get jealous anytime I got close to a woman, especially Emily. It was all part of a twisted narrative she had built where I wasn't just her son. In her mind, I was her partner, her anchor, her stand-in for the man she had lost. Hearing that said out loud, with clinical clarity, broke something in me. It was like waking up from a lifelong fever dream and realizing that the things you thought were normal or even loving were actually deeply damaging. I left that session sitting in my car for nearly an hour, just staring out the windshield, trying to absorb the weight of what I had just learned. Everything started to look different. My past, my relationships, the way I had been conditioned to prioritize her over everyone else, including myself. It was a brutal truth, but it was also the beginning of something else. The first real step toward healing. I have officially and permanently blocked my mother from every form of contact. Her numbers, her email addresses, every social media account, gone. It wasn't just a digital purge, it was a boundary I should have drawn years ago. This time it's not temporary, not conditional, and not something I'm willing to reconsider. After everything that happened, I knew I had to take real, tangible steps to protect not just myself but more importantly, Sophie. She's too young to understand any of this and I plan to keep it that way. I installed a full security system at home. Motion sensors, cameras, alerts, even a doorbell camera, because I don't trust that my mother will simply walk away quietly. She's crossed more than enough lines to convince me she's capable of showing up uninvited, of forcing herself back into our lives under the guise of concern or some warped maternal right. I'm not taking chances anymore. I contacted all relevant services, daycare, our daughter's pediatrician, even the front desk staff at our apartment complex, and gave them written instructions that under no circumstances is she to be allowed anywhere near Sophie. They all took me seriously, which was both relieving and heartbreaking. I shouldn't have to do this. No one should. I also reached out to my lawyer and started preparing documentation in case she tries to pursue any kind of grandmother rights or legal visitation. Where we live, it's rare for that to be granted, especially when one parent objects and there's a clear record of inappropriate behavior, but I'm not leaving anything to chance. We're building a file, collecting every email, every message, every disturbing incident, all of it. I'm doing everything in my power to make sure my daughter never has to be anywhere near someone who sees love as control and family as possession. I used to think protecting Emily meant choosing my words carefully and trying to keep the peace. Now I understand that real protection means putting up walls when someone tries to burn everything down. And if I have to spend the rest of my life making sure those walls hold, for Emily, for Sophie, and for myself, then so be it. Emily and Sophie stayed with her parents after everything finally unraveled. At first, we agreed to call it a trial separation, something to give us space, a pause to figure out where we stood and whether there was anything left between us that could still be salvaged. I clung to that word, trial, like it was a lifeline. I kept telling myself that if I worked on myself, if I followed through on everything I had promised, therapy, boundaries, legal action, then maybe, just maybe, she'd come back. I was holding on to hope like it was the only thing keeping me upright. But time passed, and while I was untangling myself from a lifetime of dysfunction, she was building something new for herself. A calmer life. A safer space. A future where she didn't have to constantly brace for chaos or feel like she was competing with a ghost and a woman who refused to let go of her grip on my life. When we finally sat down to talk again, it was different this time. There was no anger in her voice, no yelling or blame. Just quiet, resolute sadness. She told me she was ready to move forward, without me. She said she didn't want to be a part of this war anymore, that she was tired of being dragged into battles she never asked for. She was tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of waiting to see if I'd really change, tired of hoping that I'd finally put her and Sophie first before it was too late. She said she still cared about me and that she always would, but she needed peace. And she didn't believe she could have that with me, not anymore. Hearing her say the word divorce was like being punched in the chest. I knew it was coming, but knowing doesn't make it hurt any less. I nodded because what else could I do? I had already lost her. This was just the part where it became official. And the worst part was knowing that she wasn't wrong. She didn't walk away because she stopped loving me. She walked away because I hadn't protected her when it mattered most. I lost my marriage, but somewhere in the wreckage of it all, I found my way back to myself. It didn't happen all at once. It was slow, painful, and filled with more regret than I care to admit, but there was a point where I stopped feeling like I was drowning and started learning how to breathe again. I started seeing myself not through the lens of who my mother told me I was supposed to be, or who I had to be to keep the peace, but through the eyes of who I wanted to become. And for the first time in years, I genuinely feel like I can be a good father to Sophie. When I'm with her now, it's different. I'm more present. I laugh more. I listen more. I don't rush through our time together, and I don't carry the same weight I used to, that constant tug-of-war between obligation and guilt. I know I can't undo what happened, can't take back the choices that pushed Emily away, but I can choose better from here on out. I can show my daughter what it looks like to be strong enough to confront your past, and brave enough to do better. There's still anger inside me, not just at my mother but at the years that were stolen from me under the illusion of love, the twisted version of family that kept me small and silent. I'm angry that I was deprived of a normal life, of the chance to build a home without interference, of the peace that so many people take for granted. But that anger doesn't control me anymore. It fuels me. It reminds me of what I survived and what I won't ever allow again. It's not too late to start over. I know that now. It's not too late to rebuild something stronger from the ashes, not too late to give Sophie a version of me that she deserves. Not the man who was too afraid to choose his family, but the man who learned even if it was the hard way. And I'm grateful truly that I waited for the moment of epiphany, even if it came after the loss, even if it came too late to save my marriage. Because without it, I'd still be trapped in that same toxic cycle, calling it love, and never really knowing what freedom feels like.